So I want to invite you tonight to meet yourself. Now, you're thinking, wait a minute, I've been in this body for a couple of decades, several decades, 8 years. You know yourself. You know why you do things. You know your motivations. You know what drives you to do what you do. You know even how you're going to react in a given situation. And you sort of know how others are going to respond to you. And maybe you've had plenty of therapy, so you figure, I've spent all this money on therapy, so I know what makes me tick. But I want to ask you to think again, because the truth is, you really don't. And in fact, none of us really do. And social scientists, as they do more and more investigation of human motivations and what drives us and why we make the decisions we do and how we make the decisions we do, what they discover is that we really don't know our own motivations. They know, because they do the research, how the brain responds to stimuli, but what they find out is that the actual inhabitant of that body usually misjudges the reasons for his or her behaviors or his or her responses. So here's one of those revelations that I learned from one of my favorite podcasts. If you don't know what a podcast is, ask someone closer to 8 years old, exactly. This one's called Freakonomics. It's with the economist and social scientist Stephen Dubner. It's great. I encourage you to listen. It was about something called the headwind-tailwind phenomenon. So let me explain. First, headwind. Now, when these social scientists speak about it, this is the best way of understanding a headwind. In the Stern family, periodically, we have this experience that we call a funk, F-U-N-K, a funk. Maybe you have it in your family. Like as in, I'm in a funk today, or I'm in a funk this week. Now, this is different from depression. Depression is, of course, a serious illness. This is a temporary sort of emotional state, where just for a day or two or three or even a week, just the obstacles that seem to be ahead of us just seem like more than we can face. We just don't feel like going out into the world and dealing with everything that's out there. It feels like the winds of life are just blowing against us. Maybe you have a word for that in your family. Maybe it's not funk, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Just can't get going. Social scientists say that it's very common to feel that way, that from inside our heads looking out, it can often look like events and circumstances are actually conspiring against us, and that we have a tendency, when we're in a state like this, to overestimate the negatives, or just focus on the obstacles and the unpleasant aspects of our lives rather than achieve a more balanced perspective. It's kind of like the why me feeling you get. Why me? You feel like the cards are stacked against you, like you never get a break, like every line you stand in is the longest line. That's the funny side. But then there's a serious side. Why do I have this disease when he or she doesn't? And so what we end up doing is we blame ourselves, we blame others, or we blame unseen forces, when the real obstacles are much more complicated. The real headwinds are much more complicated. Now, on the other side of this human condition is the tailwind. Now, there are times when we feel like the wind is at our backs and we're just plowing forward. We might be soaring through business, through school, through life, any number of things, and we conclude no one could have any better marriage than us. Our kids are the best. Everything's wonderful. Now, those times, these scientists tell us, we often give ourselves credit disproportionately. Aren't I a great business person? That's why I'm doing so well. Or I'm really talented at X or Y, and that's why things are going so well. We don't realize how much of our success is actually just due to luck of birth. The efforts of others, perhaps, being in the right place at the right time, all the opportunities that we've been gifted to because of the circumstances just of our very birth. We take all the credit when, in fact, there's really a lot of credit to be spread around. So just consider this thought experiment. Imagine if the very same you, everything's the same genetics, same mental capacity, same emotional state. Imagine if you were born in Appalachia, in a poor shack, coal miner's shack, and your father was a coal miner, and the only thing you knew was coal mining. Chances are you wouldn't become a doctor or a lawyer. Same person, same competencies, but the door gets slammed in your face because of where you're born. Now, all of this wouldn't be such an issue if it wasn't so problematic when we fail to really adequately understand the headwinds and the tailwinds in our lives. If we only focus on the headwinds, which really are only part of the picture, or entirely wrong, those kinds of headwinds, we might think the universe is actually conspiring against us. We might blame God. Why is God doing this to me? We might blame others. It's not my fault that this happened to me. The other guy caused the car accident. My ex-spouse, she's really the evil one, or he's the evil one. And what those kinds of conclusions, where we overstate the headwinds, what that can lead to is really a deep resentment of another person's good fortune. If we think that everything's stacked against us, we're envious of what they've got going on. And we might even take joy in their downfall. There's a word for that. It's called Schadenfreude. Only German. You can say it in German. You can't say it in English. Schadenfreude. And failing to keep the headwinds in perspective can lead to bitterness and anger and depression, and it's not particularly useful, and it's actually not particularly becoming of us. So if you misattribute tailwinds, on the other hand, you not only overcredit yourself for your own success, but you ignore the factors that make your success possible. And what's really important is you might fault others disproportionately for their failures because you're giving yourself all the success, the credit for your success. So when they don't succeed, you say, it's all about them because my success is about me. So their failure is all about them. And we observe this phenomena in our society today, and this is where it's really a problem, where we blame the poor for their poverty. And the truth about poverty is it's caused by a variety of headwinds. Yes, personal behavior is one factor, but it also is complicated by lousy schools and rough living conditions and difficult neighborhoods and racism and so on and so on and so on. So when someone overcomes poverty, they've learned to leverage their tailwinds and overcome astoundingly complex headwinds. So, summarize. It's not that headwinds and tailwinds don't exist, they're real. But it's just that more often than not, we don't recognize how complex they really are in our lives. So what does this all have to do with Judaism, and why is a rabbi saying this pop psychology from the Bema? Because I actually think that Judaism gives us a better way to understand the complex, gives us a way to understand the detailed, introspective, complex way of understanding the headwinds and tailwinds in our lives. And it comes through gratitude. So it just so happens, and I made the prayer available for you, that Modim prayer we talked about is one that really helps us understand gratitude. Because what psychologists say is if we can really focus on gratitude, being grateful for the things in our lives, then we can understand better the tailwinds that drive us forward and know how complex they are. Now, being grateful for things is not just about saying I'm grateful for my spouse, my family, my kids, my health, etc. That's too basic. To really be grateful, we have to look deeply at the things that brought us to life. So if you take a look in the Shabbat Shalom on the right-hand side, there's one line that came from that Modim prayer on page 58 that, from my perspective, really captures it. It's on the right-hand side. I'm giving this to you so you can take it home, because this takes some real mental work. The line is, for your miracles that we experience every day, and for your wonders, deeds, and favors at every time of day, evening, morning, and noon. Now, honestly, I've never looked at that phrase the way I am right now. But that phrase cries out for a list of the miracles that we experience every day. And I don't mean supernatural miracles. I mean the miracles of birth, the miracles of knowledge, the miracles of where you live, the miracles of the world that exist for our benefit, all of those things. When you encounter those funks, those times when the headwinds seem overwhelming, if you sit back and express real gratitude for the tailwinds that drive you forward, it'll maybe help you balance those two conflicting forces that operate in our lives. So now, the next passage on the Shabbat Shalom bulletin is from the Daily Amidah. And these are every day, twice a day, Jews recite this prayer. And in the course of this prayer, they recite these are the subject headings for the 10 blessings: wisdom, repentance, forgiveness, redemption, healing, abundance, justice, and end to evil. These are the things that we ask for, the aspirations, aspects of existence that, when lacking, make our lives more difficult and more challenging. Without these essentials in our lives, the headwinds are stronger. So take these statements, and ask yourself these thought questions about them. How would more of this quality in my life help me to move forward meaningfully? What do I need to do to increase the power of that quality for myself? How would more forgiveness in my life help me to move forward more meaningful? What do I need to increase my own ability to grant forgiveness, for example? So to illustrate how this works, I want to just give you an example of a person I came to know, or I should say I learned about this past week. was asked to lead Shiva services at her family's home. So to protect her family's anonymity, let's call her Laura. Laura was a blonde Jew who lived in Poland during the Holocaust, and she was hidden out by her family with a non-Jewish family. And only when this family giving her haven was afraid for their own lives was she turned over to the Nazis. And she was transported in a cattle car, and she told her family of lying in that cattle car and feeling someone on her leg and pushing that person and waking up only to find out that that person wasn't alive. That's why he was lying on her foot. She was forced on a death march without shoes to the camp, and she ended up in Bergen-Belsen. And she witnessed in her life as a child the worst of what the world can do to itself. She was liberated. She ended up in Los Angeles. She had grandchildren. Now, it would be entirely understandable if Laura was bitter and depressed and angry and self-absorbed. Those experiences could do it to anyone. But that's not what happened. Because what Laura did was to turn things around. Because when her family spoke about her, they recalled a positive, loving, compassionate, kind woman. A woman who found the good in everyone. A woman who everyone who met her came away believing that they were the most important person in her life. And how did she do it? Well, maybe it's because she balanced those headwinds and tailwinds. Because if she saw in her life the responsibility to overcome a lack of justice in the world, a lack of abundance, a lack of righteousness, just like the headings in these blessings, things that she encountered the absence of in her childhood by being the opposite in her own life, being more merciful and compassionate and giving, maybe that helped her balance her perception of headwinds and tailwinds. And by responding to the evil that she experienced with ultimate good, maybe that helped her balance the headwinds and tailwinds in her life. So if Laura could do it, then we can do it well also, through thoughtful gratitude for all the things that make life possible. We can overcome and recognize the tailwinds. And through understanding what's lacking, what's truly necessary and available for our lives to be complete, we can recognize those headwinds. So our lives can be more complete, we can be more understanding of others as well as ourselves, more forgiving of their faults as well as our own, more cognizant of our own strengths and shortcomings and opportunities. This isn't easy, because the scientists tell us that our brains actually work against us. But I believe if you take this home and give it some serious thought and draw heavily from a Jewish tradition that helps us reflect on our own lives and how we live them, that it will make it more possible for us to live our lives with meaning and ultimately for us to be better human beings. Amen.